Welcome to the Unlock Your Culture webcast, a monthly discussion about preserving traditional fire service culture in the modern setting. With your hosts, Sean Duffy, Pablo Jenner, John Hayowick, and Mark Alone. We hope you enjoy the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to episode number 19 of the Unlock Your Culture webcast. With you always, Mark Alone, my partners in crime, John Hayowick and Sean Duffy, and Pablo is still radio silent on his new gig, enjoying recruit life, I think. So kind of a good day to have an episode as we celebrate. Well, celebrate's a bad word. I don't know why it always comes out of my mouth. As we
memorialize,
remember the 21st anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And so that's where we got our title tonight, Remember, Reflect, and then Refine. So our plan tonight is we're going to kind of share some personal experiences, our memories of 9/11 and kind of our thoughts that go with it. And then we're going to kind of branch off of that and just kind of talk about how our cultures memorialize our fallen members and some of the things that come with that. So without further ado, we'll get into it. John, I want to start with you, man, because I think proximity wise and experience wise, you were probably one of the closer out of the group to actually being there, and actually were there a little bit. So, what are your thoughts, man? Sure. Hit us with it.
It was definitely an interesting day. The wild part about it was I got off that morning of 9/11. We do 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock, but due to circumstances beyond my control, I was detailed to the radio room. So I was covering the night dispatch game. Night dispatch. Got to put the giant game down. The night dispatch, and I got off at 8 o'clock, and I was just about getting home, and was listening to the News Radio 88 with the old AM/FM news channel, and all of a sudden the helicopter guy was like 48 past the hour, said they had smoke coming from lower Manhattan. And for all you young cats that are listening, I turned my scanner on, and not my phone, but my scanner, and dialed in, the 154-250, which was Manhattan's radio frequency. And I was listening, going in, and it sounded bad. So we were just listening, and all of a sudden I got to TV and saw what was going on. Then unfortunately I was able to, I saw the second plane go in. And at that point I knew something was up. It wasn't just an accident. And long story short, I made it back to work. I stopped in, saw my parents real quick and told them I was headed back to work. And at that time we weren't going in yet. The chief was deciding what was going on and figuring out what was happening. And we finally sent a crew of about 4 in that evening. And by that time I was back at work. I was dispatching the 1800 to 0800 shift. And I was ordered to check on these guys every hour on the radio to make sure that what was going on. Some of you guys know John Lewis, Walt Lewis's brother. John was, I believe, a firefighter or just a lieutenant at that time. No, 2001, he was a firefighter. Him and a bunch of other, probably about 3 or 4 other guys went in, and we were checking on them. And John had big ties and still has big ties to FDNY and stuff like that. So we got out that next morning. We rallied. We had about 50 firefighters. We grabbed all of our tactical trucks and our pickup trucks and explorers, and we all piled in and went down into lower Manhattan, which was probably the wildest ride, because going across the George Washington Bridge, if anybody's ever done it, so it's a pretty big span between Jersey and New York. And there was nothing on the river. The Hudson was silent that day. And of course, having Port Authority and National Guard units on either side of the bridge as we went down across and down West Side Highway. And it was just wild, just getting there and seeing it. I call it moon dust. Anybody knows what snow is? It was like snow, but it was lighter. It was just this gray material with paper and stuff strewn through it. And it was just wild. We walked up. There was no real there was no real organization of what was going on. We just jumped in line with guys that were working the pile and handing stuff out and passing stuff back out and looking. And then, later on through the day, they had the USAR team started showing up in the task forces. So I was tasked. I was a junior firefighter at the time. I didn't have my year on the job yet. And I was tasked with the captain that decided that we were going to offload these trailers and stuff like that. But not before I was able to bump into an old family friend. He was rescued for Tommy Macri. He's retired off the job now. Crazy how life happens. I grew up on Long Island from ages like 2 to 12, and Tommy was a volunteer fireman with my dad in Kings Park. And this is the guy that told me how to open up the old fashioned beer cans. You tap on the top and you got to pull it off, and you have the thing here, and the firehouse parties in the backyard and stuff. And before I got on the job, I was fortunate enough to do a couple ride-alongs with Rescue 4 and sleep over in their quarters. And Tommy and I became friends. He was my dad's friend, but he became mine. And that was one thing I had in my head that whole going in. I'm like, I hope I can run into Tommy. What's the chances? 11,000 firefighters in FDNY. And I just got chills. Him and I actually bumped into each other in one of the hotel lobbies. We gave each other a big hug, told each other to stay safe. And again, I'm just a snot-nosed rookie, and here's a seasoned rescue company guy. Hugged each other and just kept moving on, because I was going one way, he was going another, just to get things done. And it's just crazy how things worked out that way. Again, we did probably between 12 and 16 hours during that day. And after that, I know I didn't go back in. I think by that next couple of days, they sort of organized everything on who's coming in, having a better accountability of the pile and the different things. Some of the buildings were still burning at the time, and later collapsed or were partially demoed. Some of the crazy stuff that I saw is fire engines on fire, or just fire engines just flowing water unmanned, just tapped into the hydrant system. And we did the best that we could with what we had, and it was really humbling. And to this day, I'm still taken back by it. I knew a couple people, and so the odd part about this, and we'll talk about memorializing and remembering, for the next month or two, I think Chief Allura will back me up on that. Departments from throughout the world and the United States and everything were coming down and going to firefighter funerals. And if anybody's ever been to a line of duty death firefighter funeral, it's for especially FDNY, you're looking at 10,000 to 15,000 people standing in line 4 or 5 deep for like miles. And we were going to these funerals, and there were 50, 60, sometimes 10, 15. It was very humbling. So it was one of those things that we were doing, and it seemed at least was 3 or 4 a week that we were going to and stuff. But you got to give them the honor of that because of what they did, their ultimate sacrifice. So to this day, I'm lucky enough that maybe I didn't. I'm good. I'm good. We were talking about the 9/11 illnesses and stuff, and I never really signed up for that. I'm, knock on wood, I guess, lucky enough that no exposure, whatever else. But that's my 9/11. That's what it was. We were doing that into October, November, December, and as it got further away, the numbers started to increase again to the funerals and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people don't really, I don't know if they don't recognize it, they just may not know. It's just how long it went on afterwards, right? And then, obviously the city is still the city. So you've got to run calls, you've got to staff companies, you got to do all that stuff with this going on. It's crazy if you think about it, you know what I mean? On just the scale of what you're looking at. It's nuts.
So one of the odd things was we had one of our guys, he was only a year or so on before me. His father was a captain in 23 engine. And we actually brought across our tiller to do one of the funerals, to put the flag up. So one of our guys drove all the way into New York City, which it's not the best ride in the back of a tiller. It's a little bumpy, and let's make sure you're wearing your seatbelt, or else you're going to crack your neck on the roof when you hit a bump or something like that. But we brought it in. The chief of the department at the time was really cool with that. And we did what we did. We went to that, but it's about the brotherhood, and it's about not forgetting and giving them the paying the respect.
Yeah, I think this is where I like that, the three of us, and we have vastly different experiences, I think, in life, right? And 9/11 is such a good example of how so many people from so many different walks of life and upbringings and everything else could be affected similarly, right? But with their own experience. So, for me, I was 17 years old, I think. I was still in high school. I remember it coming on the TV. My whatever class I was in, I don't remember. I could tell you, if you put the teacher in a lineup, I could pick him up, but I couldn't tell you his name today. But his son worked in one of the towers, and so he was just gone. Everybody's like, "What happened? Where'd he go? He's gone, right? He's got to go find his kid." And ironically, I'd been on the job as a volunteer for less than a year. I had just started that December, I think. I don't even know. Looking back, I don't even know if I was done with my interior firefighter yet. I was in classes, right? But I don't even remember how far my training was. But what I remember the most was that we had people in our high school staff that knew I was a volunteer firefighter that basically came up to me in the hallway like, "Hey, if you need to go, go." I was like, "Okay, I don't know what to do." Went to the firehouse, and it was just kind of, I know I don't sound like it anymore, but I grew up in upstate New York. Grew up 3 hours outside the city. And I remember being at the firehouse, and everybody was trying to go, and nobody, kind of what you said, right? You guys were close. You just went over, and everybody's wanting to go help, and nobody really knows what that means. They just want to get the rigs and go. I remember there was I think it was a 1-800 number where you could sign up to, like, if you had resources to go at one point. I think this was probably a week or two after. And I remember being told that I was too young. And I don't know if that was a cop-out excuse at the time, or their nice way of telling me, "Hey, you don't really have any tangible skills at this point," or, "We don't want you down there because you are young." But so I remember that part of it. I remember the emotions of it. And I think I was kind of old enough to understand it, but still young enough to be naive about it. And what honestly I remember the most after the fact, obviously what most of us remember is just all the freaking pass alarms going off. I remember being one of the few people around me that recognized that noise on the TV, and nobody had a clue what it was. And then I remember for the months after it, when all the ricin and the sarin and all that started, I remember camping out in the back of a walk-in rescue, sitting in parking lots for hours and hours because nobody did hazmat yet. And it just, 9/11 to me, if I think we can all speak to what happened in the city, but to me, it just opened up this Pandora's box of our mission expanding, like being forced into all these things. There was hazmat guys before that, but all of a sudden it was in high demand. It was a thing. And then, we being so close, we had guys that work for, state OEM, and we had people that were on the USAR teams. And so they're all cycling through. And if you look at it just from the city's aspect, but just the aftershocks that move outward and all the outlying agencies near it and how they were affected, these volunteer departments that are, trying to run their calls, but trying to send help, and they have people that work in the city. And it's just, again, I struggle now as an adult to kind of just grasp the magnitude of the entire event, and then just to hear stories of people from other countries that are so just deeply impacted by watching it on TV, right? But then you have people that were physically there. I can't imagine being on the ground that day in any capacity while it happened, and somehow living a normal life after that. I can't. How do you put that out of your mind? How do you, it's so cliche, right? Like, life goes on, but how does life go on for you after, like, I'm taking it outside the fire service. Probably even worse if you're outside the fire service, but you're a civilian walking down the road, and you watch this happen once, maybe twice, depending on how early you were there. And then your whole life is just, it's wild, man. So
So just to touch on that, so that, yeah, we started having the anthrax attacks within a couple months of that. And that's when things started going sideways, it seemed like, and we started taking on more roles. One of the odd things, I know the chief can attest to this, our cities are directly under the flight path for Newark. The skies were empty. There was a lockdown, and every once in a while you get a couple fighter jets racing up the Hudson, in between like the Jersey City, New York border and stuff like that. And I know they stayed away from ground zero area because they were operating stuff, but it was wild. And then just to see the transformation of when it went from like the pile, and then, the makeshift memorials going up. At that time, I was going into, I had a friend that was going into New York City, and I'd go in and just seeing the missing signs on the bus terminals.
Yeah, man.
Looking for, I can't find. That was just pretty. That just popped back in my head. I just remembered that. Whether I put it out or whatever where it was, but that was just normal day-to-day operations for people. Now, their loved ones were gone. They didn't know, or they just went missing.
Yeah,
until they got the recognition of, yes, we found something and all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know about you, and then I want Sean's perspective from, obviously he's got a completely different, location and everything else experience with it, but I almost feel guilty sometimes because you're right across the river, right? I'm in the same state, but I think if you're near or from New York, you almost overlook Flight 93 in the Pentagon. It's like it never happened. It's like it's two completely unrelated events, even though they're all the same. And I've never really met many people in my life that had a direct experience with those, right? That were at the Pentagon or that had loved ones on, Flight 93. And it's just, I don't mean to be that way, but I can relate so much more to what happened in the city versus, the other things. But it's again, to go back to the magnitude thing, there's these two other events that happened, and who knows how many more if people didn't act, when they did. So Sean, tell us about your 9/11 memories.
Oh man, I think I was like 16 years old, living in Florida. My parents had got divorced when I was like 14, so my dad moved back to New Jersey, and my dad worked for Trenton EMS for, gosh, as long as I can remember as a kid. So I'd always kind of been around public safety and everything like that. So a lot of friends that were firemen and paramedics and things like that. So my first thought sitting in class watching that kind of unfold when they put it on the TV is I just felt like empty, because all I could think about is like, I wonder if my dad's there, wonder if he's going and stuff like that. And we didn't really have like a good relationship then, so we didn't really talk. So that was like a really, really weird feeling. But at the same time, emotionally connected, if that makes sense. Like it was in that moment watching that all go down that I realized like, well, I now know why my dad does what he does. Like this is pretty much history in the making, where you're going to get to do all the things that you've trained to do. And instead of saving people that you don't know, now you're saving one of your own, in vast numbers. And I just remember that kind of hit me really, really hard. And seeing that with all the civilians that were there that lost their lives and all the firemen and police officers and things, that I felt like I needed to do something. So that set the stage for me going forward. As soon as I was 18, graduated high school, I went straight down to the volunteer firehouse. It's like 2 miles down the road from my house. And I started volunteering. And I just felt like that's what I had to do. That was me giving my part. And I actually finally, started talking to my dad again and just asking about it. And he never really did talk about it too much. He really wouldn't say anything other than, it was the most horrific thing that he's ever seen. And you could tell it really, really bothered him. So I've always hung on to that. And like days like today where, everyone's doing the stair climb and things like that, I have much more of an emotional connection to it, because that was my dad, right? He was there doing things and helping out the best he could. So other than that, I just remember this weird turning point where all of a sudden everybody that I knew from high school and stuff started coming through the firehouse, right? They all wanted to volunteer and do their part. And it was just this really nice thing to see out of all this tragedy, that people kind of found their purpose of, maybe this is what I want to do. And some made a career out of it and some didn't. But I will tell you now, going on almost 18 years in the fire service, that you meet people like Captain Mike Dugan and all those other people over there that share the stories, and you just realize how selfless they were. Right? They weren't thinking about anything, just doing what they had to do, helping each other and that brotherhood. And that's kind of where I think for me in the fire service, I kind of take issue with some things, why I feel it so personally, that like we throw around that term brotherhood so much. But do we live it? Do we really know what it means? Because that's a perfect example. I mean, guys didn't have to go there and they did. They were off duty, they were begging to go. They stayed, they didn't sleep. They were trying to make sure that they found everybody and everybody was accounted for. And I don't know, it's just, you think about that and you reflect on it, and you see all the people that you meet and how they've impacted you as an individual and throughout your career. And it just, it's a very, very emotional thing. That's really the only word I can use to describe it, because even talking about it now, goosebumps and chills. And, I would say that that's something that we owe it to ourselves as professionals to never forget that moment and why we do what we do, but most importantly, why they did what they did. And don't ever, kind of turn your back on that, because to me anyway, it's a very, very sacred thing.
I'm with you, man. And, it's funny you bring that up, because I think about this sometimes. You see these guys off duty doing things. You see, cops, and, I watched one the other day. I think it was near Atlanta. It was like 3 kids in a car drove by a house fire and stopped and went in and made a grab on whoever was in the house. And it's funny because you say, right, like they were so selfless. I don't question anything we do at work. Like I don't even think twice about it. But it's funny because I feel like my thought process going home in my own truck is different than, oh, we were called there on the fire truck. And I don't know why that is. It's not. I like to think I would act right, but it's almost like when you're at work, it's just a different mentality. There is no question. There's no doubt. It's like, hey, we know we're going there and we have to deal with it. So, but it's cool. I love that we all, again, have similar experiences in a different way. And I bring it up because I didn't want this to be just a generic, let's talk about 9/11 again type show. I wanted to pose a question to everybody, and I hope I do, and I hope it doesn't come off disrespectful. But I was kind of thinking, we have a lot of people in the fire service starting to come in the fire service now that weren't alive when 9/11 happened. And so I think as I watch TV every year, and as I go in public and I see less and less American flags, and I see a nation that's further and further divided, and there's fewer shows about it, part of it gets me pissed off. And it's funny because I recall watching the coverage like 5, 6, 7 years after, and being visibly upset. I bet if you asked my wife on 9/11, I would not, before we had kids, I wouldn't talk to anybody. I would sit on the fucking couch and I would watch 9/11 shows all day and be pissed off because that's what I needed to be. And I don't even have that connection, right? I wasn't there. It was an experience. But what I'm noticing is that I think there is going to have to come a point where we continue to remember, but it's going to look different because you have to move on at some point. And so I've racked my brains all day. And the only thing I could think that was like sort of close to compare it to without being disrespectful is Pearl Harbor. And I say that because all of us know what happened at Pearl Harbor, right? We all, we recognize it as a horrible tragedy to our country, aggression from a foreign nation, but none of us have that personal connection. But the generation that went through that in real time, I bet you felt the same way that we feel about 9/11. And so I bring it up because I want your thoughts, because I see a lot of the younger people getting bashed for not being 9/11 experts and not, stopping their day to do a stair climb. And And part of it is that they just don't have the connection, and some of it's an education thing. It is history, but I just feel like at some point we need to transition from the emotion that we have to pulling out the things that we took from it, right? And these are a few things I'll just drop and then turn it over to you guys, right? Fitness. It doesn't have to be we do this because of 9/11. It's like, hey, this event happened and we realized that as a fire service, we need to be more fit. These guys, it was just an undertaking of hours of ascent with equipment that nobody ever thought about. You know, John brought up that, we talked about the hazmat thing, complacency. If you think about the fighter jets scrambled with no ordnance on it, right? The only way they were going to take a jetliner down was to kamikaze the thing out of the air because we were complacent as a nation. So, Chief, you got something?
Oh, we're reading an email.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought I didn't want to miss you. So, John, Sean, I mean, what are your thoughts? I hope I'm not disrespectful when I say that, but I think it's a reality we're going to have to face.
So I think it comes back to culture in the fire service, just like anything else. And again, not to what we do. We're talking about culture. If we forget it and don't tell the up and coming new firefighters how important it is that one day in the fire service, then we've done a disservice and we've forgotten those that paid the ultimate sacrifice. So whether it's day one in the academy or day two in the academy, there has to be a conversation about the sacrifice. And that is the ultimate example of sacrifice. And I sort of want to, before Sean jumps in, Mike, question for you down at your academy. When do you guys bring in about the ultimate sacrifice?
Excuse me.
That sounded juicy.
We don't.
Really?
No, not in a meaningful way, like we're talking about here. Again, you have to understand, I don't do a whole lot of instruction these days, more administration, but right outside the classroom is our small monument on the fire academy property. And I kind of make it my business to make sure that they understand when they disrespect the monument. But as far as having a conversation about it, to the best of my knowledge, we don't really do that in a way that would be representative of what we're talking about here.
Okay. Sean, how do we not let this fall by the wayside with future generations of the fire service, and even future generations of our kids? Our kids are young. I believe, just doing the math, Elizabeth and Kelly are the ones, they weren't alive when that went down, my kids, but the other ones were all small when everything happened, So how do you explain that? They know, the kids know that today's just an odd day for me. And I was talking with Amy and she's like, well, what's up? I'm like, well, today I'm heavy. That's the feeling I have. And there's no real, again, I knew a couple of guys from FDNY. There was no direct connection besides just being them directly across the river from us. And we could see ground zero from our department. We could see the smoke. We could see everything out of the backside of our drill tower. But again, it's just a heavy day. So how do we get these younger generations to understand how important and symbolic this day was?
Oh man, there's so much to unpack in that. I can give you how I feel, which by no means is right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just me, my perspective on it. And my thing is, like, we need to make it personal, right? Like, this job is a very personal thing. If you take 9/11 completely out of it, just look on social media any given day. When something happens to one of our brothers and sisters, we all know about it. and we all do things to help, right? We pitch in, we do benefits, whatever that is, because that's a very personal thing, right? We consider ourselves a family. Well, even if you weren't around in the fire service when that happened, or you don't know much about it, that should still be something very personal to you. You're a firefighter. That happened to all of us, right? That happened to every single person, career, volunteer, paid on call, whatever you want to call it. Those were our brothers and sisters. And take the fire service out of it. Those are our people. Those are civilians, right? The people we're sworn to protect. So it's a very, very personal thing. And I think you need to tell that to people that, hey, 343 firemen, or firefighters, I should say, that gave their life that day, did not think at any point in their career that they were going to have to do the things they did. None of us do, but it happened. So the best thing we can do is prepare ourselves mentally, physically, and do all the things that we're supposed to do and learn, and again, this isn't just about 9/11. This is just as a whole. Anytime a firefighter fatality happens, there's a line of duty death. There's a NIOSH report comes out. We should be reading those. We should be learning, like, what went right, what went wrong, how does it affect us? Like, because how do I make myself better so that the people that are coming in underneath me are taught those lessons so that they can be better than we are, right? And that was 9/11, I think, was a very impactful lesson for all of us to learn across the nation. Public safety, just being, just being a citizen of this country. There was so much stuff that we were not prepared for. And doing our diligence to pass that stuff on and say, hey, like, this is unfortunately what happened. This is what we've learned, and do our best to just kind of align ourselves with that and make that, it continues to go. And I worked for a fire department for a short time before they laid me off. That one of the guys that came on was a probationary firefighter, right? He wasn't even off his year. And unfortunately, he died at a fire. And it was the result of poor training, right? I shouldn't say poor training, but not as good as accountability as they could have had. And that department learned a lot of lessons. And at every firehouse you walked in, everybody knew about Brian Wilkie. Everybody. Even if it was your first day on the job, like, you knew about it. We read the NIOSH report. There was a shadow box in every firehouse with his picture, his badge, his coat, and everything. Every year for Christmas, we did things for their family because he had a little daughter when he died. So we would always drive by and do, like, drop-offs and things. And that is very small in comparison to what we're talking about tonight. But those are just the things that, like, you help memorialize it, right? You tell people about it, and it just becomes second nature. Everyone just buys in, and they continue to do it because it's the respectable thing to do. And every firehouse probably has some type of 9/11 tribute somewhere, and if you're one of those people that have come into the fire service, like you were born in 95 or whatever it is, and you don't know much about it, ask the people. Do what we're doing right now. Like, hey, where were you on this day? How did it make you feel? What did you learn? Do you know anybody that was there? Just those questions, because, they have that term, like, history repeats itself, right? I want to know the history of my fire service. I want to know the history of my fire department. I want to know the history of the people that I work with, because to me, it all matters, right? I'm going to work every day, and I'm laying it all on the line. None of us are promised a tomorrow. Like, I don't know who thinks that they're going to make it through their whole career and be just fine. Nobody has promised you that, right? So the best thing that you could possibly do is just make it personal. That would be my suggestion.
So I'm going to pick on Michelle for a minute here, because I feel like this is kind of in her wheelhouse. I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, when is it healthy to kind of adjust the way you remember? Because at some point we have to process this stuff, right? You can't just be pissed off for the entire rest of your life. At some point you have to flip the script to, quote unquote, move on. And I know, there's probably some people who will never move on, but you can't live your whole life at that level of emotion. You can't be productive. So, if it's not in your wheelhouse, Michelle, yell at me and tell me to move on. But, I'm just do you think there comes a point where you do hang something on the wall and then, once a year you bring everybody around and you tell your stories and it feels less impactful every year, but it's not, right? Because it's just you're slowly moving on from it.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not a clinician, right? You're recording it, so I should say that out loud. I'm not a clinician. However,
You're an educated bystander.
what? What did he say?
You're an educated bystander.
Oh, an educated bystander. I like that. I don't hear very well. We've determined that in this household. In any case, it's really how well are you coping post-incident, right? So, is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? In a month in, are you still feeling really these stress symptoms, right? And then how much are they affecting your life and different areas of your life? And then it goes on to needing, maybe some help from someone that can help you to cope better or help you to kind of unpack the trauma. Remember, trauma is different. I mean, I live in Florida, right? But there are a lot of people all over the country that watched it on TV and experienced a vicarious trauma from just watching it on TV. There are people who started hoarding and collecting memorabilia because they felt so attached to it, even though they live across the country. So how is this affecting your life? Getting the appropriate services to get you to living a full and complete life, and then working with a clinician on how do I commemorate this every year. But there's actually some pushes in the, is that a word?
It is now.
There's a big push nationwide to start including 9/11 in education in schools, right? The history. And I think that that's a really big thing that we can do every year in a very healthy way and an age appropriate way, and not sitting, a young child down and watching videos of towers falling and people screaming and people jumping out of windows, right? There are age appropriate ways to do it. And as we grow and as we, develop, there are, then we can start introducing some of the really tougher things to unpack. So, but I think education is important, and making sure you have the right help in place if you're not coping well is really key, and deciding what's best for you and your family to commemorate every year.
So I think that brings us right down a pretty good path, because when did your fire departments start their memorials? I'm just going to throw that out there. Did you have a memorial prior to 9/11? So the year of 2001 was a rough year for the city of Passaic. We had Al Tarado's funeral, line of duty death, on May 9th of 2001. So that started our memorial in 2002. So that was our first year of that. And
When did he die, John?
May 9th, 2001.
He died on May 9, 2001?
Yes, sir. So with that, we started our memorial, the city of Passaic. And prior to him, we had approximately, I want to say 10 other line of duty deaths prior. And Mark and Sean and I were talking offline before, and Mark hit up the nail on the head. I think Sean hit the nail on the head about reading the NIOShes. And it's always important to know not to let the deaths of a line of duty go in vain. So you have to learn about what occurred. And we were talking about an instance on how to prevent some things that have occurred. It might be too soon. I know there was a bad apparatus accident in northern Jersey just yesterday, and 8 brothers went to the hospital. A couple are really serious. So my thoughts and prayers to them and their families. But we were talking about different things that we done, and Passaic had that. We've had collisions between the ladder and the Chiefs gig, which resulted in deaths and injuries. So many years ago. So knowing what occurred to try and prevent it from the future. And I started doing something by calling out as a lieutenant at a major cross street. I was calling out where I was going, and just something that I did, and I continued through as a battalion at major intersections. And it was good to see and hear on the radio, listening to other shifts where I was prior to getting transferred to where I ended up and retired from, other officers doing the same thing, calling out, approaching, such and such apparatus approaching. And that sort of helped us out, to help prevent that. But again, you've got to learn from the past, and don't let the souls of the departed, don't let them down. They didn't die in vain. They're protecting lives and future lives. So that, our memorial, again, with that, just started the year after Al passed away in 2001. And we've had a memorial every year ever since.
Remarkable. I have to capture some of the things that John's brought up, and you and everybody's brought up so far. And it's funny, I remember the anthrax stuff, going on calls, multiple calls a day for white powder anthrax. I mean, it just was nonstop. I remember having to lock our rigs. We no longer could leave our rigs running. We had to shut them off and take the keys because there was threats of taking ambulances and rescues and engines, and people still do that today. Weird. I remember being locked down at the National Fire Center and told we weren't going to have any wildland fire aircraft to support us for the next several days, and all those things. But one thing I don't think I planned for, and then I'll lead into my second point. I was still in the National Guard, but I didn't think in my mind, how active was I going to be? As a paramedic assigned to a Black Hawk, I thought, okay, I'm going to get busy. And my tempo for life, civilian life, immediately slowed down within a month because the Olympics were coming to Utah, and everybody wanted to cancel the Olympics. But then everybody also said, hey, no, we need to get back to normalization. We cannot live in this mindset of being shut down mentally while the pile is still being taken apart. So I got activated for the Olympics and spent 4 months in Salt Lake City, doing all those things that go along with that. And when you're in the National Guard, and it ties back into, I went from one activation to another deployment to 19 months in Iraq. 9 months out, I came home for 3 weeks, and 9 more months back out. And I struggled when I got back to my fire department. I absolutely struggled. And some of the guys that know me, they know how hard I struggled. I didn't want to sit at the kitchen table because in Iraq, I watched our DFAC get blown up, and I watched Mosul's DFAC get blown up. And I just thought, you know what? You don't stay at the kitchen table. Even though we solve all the world's problems at the kitchen table, I would shove in my food and get the heck out of the kitchen. And it took a bad call for me to realize I had not come out of combat operation mindset. 19 months I spent in combat. So my mindset was still in that tempo, a month out of being home. And to Michelle's point, it took me stepping away from the fire department, which broke my heart. Fire departments did not know what to do with a lot of us when we were coming back from combat struggling. We didn't have anything in place. They said, here's Valium, here's Depakote, here's antidepressants. And I just couldn't do it. I could not do it. When I started seeing butterflies, I knew I needed to get off the drugs. But I went to the Wildland Firefighter Foundation, because I'd always been a wildland guy as well. Over here in the West, you get a lot of that. And I went back to work for the Forest Service that summer because the fire department said, hey, we're putting you on a medical leave. And the best thing for me was to dig in the dirt all day long and getting 3 meals a day and sleeping in the mountains every night. I did that for 6 months. And that was the most therapeutic thing, I think, for me. Others, it may not have done that. But the wildland fire world, just like the structure fire world, is a paramilitary organization. And you know where you're getting your meals, and you know what you're eating every day. And then that's what helped me. To Michelle's point of everybody's a little bit different. But to me, that's what helped me. But to the other point that was brought up earlier between Mark and Sean and John was this, and I apologize for hijacking it a little bit here. Hi, Caleb.
That's the whole point, man. Go on with it.
But you have to look at each generation. And each generation has its moment of testing and trialing and overcoming. And, you know, guys like John and Mark and others, you know, I'm not saying Sean any different, you know, he was young, but when we're literally living in those moments to some experience, we will always empathize with the men and women that were in there. I remember, you know, I was on the Forest Service call-up team. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to FDNY. No, the military decided to take me instead. But we will always remember and empathize. It's just like Yarnell, the Yarnell fire down in Prescott, Arizona. You know, I knew those men, absolutely knew them. And each generation has to have its moment. And I hate to say this, I do hate to say it, but I know it's coming. The generation that's been hired in the last 5 years will have their moment in the next 15. It may not be tomorrow, it may not be next week, it may not be next year, but it's going to happen. It's going to test all of us again.
I hope they're ready for it.
Well, we just had it in Surfside, right? Where it really tested those boundaries and those new communication styles and the new type of brotherhood. And that's what Surfside was. And it was a very interesting thing to watch unfold with this generation.
Perfect point. Because if you look at what's happened in the last 5 years, all these mass shootings, right?
Mhm.
That's what's testing the generation that's been hired in the last 5 years, is the mass shootings. And to my final piece, you know, we all know guys from FDNY, but like this morning, first thing I did, right as I woke up, I texted Frank Lee, Chief out at the Rock, and I texted Chris Esser, battalion chief over at FDNY, friends of mine, and I said, hey man, I love you guys. My thoughts are with you and your brothers, and you don't need to respond back, because I'm sure you're busy today. But I just want to know I love you, even though you're on the East Coast and I'm over here out in the West. And if you want some of our wildfires, come out. But they texted me back this morning and said, hey, thanks, Chief. You know, love you too. And thanks for the thoughts. But even just doing those little connections that we have with our FDNY brothers and sisters, I'm telling you, that means so much to those guys. You know, here we are 21 years later. There you go.
I like it. It's kind of a good segue too to just a thought I have about, you know, the fire service post 9/11, which is, you know, did we get too comfortable as a profession because we had all the attention? Because I remember you couldn't go anywhere with a firefighter without somebody thanking you or throwing cupcakes at you. And, you know, I look at now how we're fighting for staffing and equipment and budgets. And I just almost wonder, would one of these unintended consequences of that day years down the road be the fact that we had that public appeal for so long that we stopped working for it, that we got disconnected from our communities in the process? Because, you know, if you think about it, the cops didn't get the same glory that the fire service got after that. And what, 60 New York City police officers died in it, you know. EMS, geez, still nobody gave a shit about EMS. Those poor guys, you know, that they can't win, right? But nobody had an outreach for EMS. Fire really got the bulk of the public support. And I just, you know, again, I can't help but wonder, you know, everybody's thoughts. Did we take it for granted for so long that that's how we got disconnected?
I think it's part of the politicians. Go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one thing that we did a lot of, everybody, you couldn't walk down the freaking street without somebody wearing a blue fire department t-shirt and a Maltese cross after 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And if they saw that, you were getting a handshake, a hug, and asking, you know, to name their first child after you. And now, if you look, the cops have taken our brothers in blue, they have taken their beating for the last few years on issues in their organizations and their line of work. EMS has taken their beating with the pandemic. Those folks are burned out left and right, right? And instead, what you saw was cops are burned out, EMS workers are burned out, but after 9/11, we were so put on a pedestal that people, they took it for granted. That's what's happened.
So I'm going to touch on that a little bit. And I think it goes back to the politicians looking at us as an insurance policy. So they saw what was needed. All right. And I'm going to bring this a little bit down a different path or another rabbit hole. Look at the things that we had. We had the increase in interoperability for our radio and communication systems, mutual aid agreements, the National Response Plan came out, and NIMS all tightened up just because of that. Those came into play a little bit more with the National Response Plan, the interoperability and stuff for a lot of these non-man-made events, such as hurricanes. We saw that with Katrina, the positives and the negatives on that, as well as coming up to Superstorm Sandy and some of the other storms that hit down in Florida. And I forget the ones that devastated the Panhandle, Sean, back in like 2018, 19.
Hurricane Michael.
Was that Michael in like Panama City?
It was Mexico Beach, Florida.
Okay. And again, that's where a lot of that stuff from 2001, we were able to grow and get that. Of course, we're not going to have full interoperability. It's not, that's a complete joke because of, I believe because of technology, and we don't have the finances to upgrade as it goes through for communication skills. But again, our mutual aid agreements are a framework for the national response plans have done well in these last couple events. And hopefully we never see another man-made event that tasks the nation like some of our hurricanes, and even look at the ice storm in Texas, how that crippled Texas in, was it 2000, 2001, that winter. So again, we've grown with it to respond to it. But again, going back to my prior statement, I think we've thrown a lot of money at it with the politicians, but now they want to say, hey, where's it being used? And now like, hey, we're only coming out as an insurance policy. So they only want to dole out as much as they can when they want to.
You got something, Sean? Thought you were gonna say something earlier.
Oh no, I was just touching.
No,
on
it's just, hey, look, just had crickets because you went sideways.
No,
No,
I mean, John's right. Like, here's the thing about insurance, right? Like, you look at any insurance that you pay for or whatever. I know that I've heard it quite often. I don't know about you guys, but I don't know why we pay for you. I've never used you, right? Well, that's just it. Like, an insurance policy is that you don't need it until you need it, but when you do, you're damn happy it's there. So, with that being said, I think the mindset of some firefighters throughout the years is just that, like, oh, fires are down or whatever, we're just an EMS agency, or whatever their mindset is, they've allowed to kind of creep in and take over and sidetrack us from our original purpose. And I think that we're doing a good job of kind of curbing that. I don't want to paint a bad picture and say like that's the fire service as a whole right now, because it certainly isn't. But like Bill was saying, like, he had a ton of burnout, and that's all over the place, and that contributes to like how your mind works and how you process things and how you treat others around you, people coming in for the first time. We have to be careful how we project ourselves onto other members in our organizations, especially the newer ones who are young and impressionable. What we say, what we do, it all matters. So I think, not to get too sidetracked here, but there was a lot of different things going on for various different reasons. And I think finally now, like 21 years later, we're starting to figure this out, where we're like, we can't continue this, right? We gotta do something to fix this, because it has impacted us as a profession. And anybody who says otherwise hasn't seen all the YouTube videos or the videos on Facebook and things like that. And you look at like again, like Bill was saying, you see what's going on with the police, like defund the police, right? There was like all of that stuff. Well, sooner or later we're up, right? Like they're gonna want to do that to us too, and we have to make sure that we show them like we're worth it, And around 9/11 and that time, like that wasn't a thought. Like you were saying, Mark, everyone thought we were worth it, right? but it's 21 years later. So we can't continue to fall back on that and say, but 9/11, look, I'm a
Yeah.
firefighter, right? Like we just can't
Absolutely.
do that anymore. We have to find a way to fight for our purpose and show people the value in what we do without tragedy.
And that's where I think we've developed into that all hazard response.
That's
And
what I think we developed into community risk reduction and showing value outside of just response calls, John. That's my opinion. Sorry.
no, and you're absolutely right. So the all hazard aspect of that falls right into the community, the CCR, community risk reduction.
Well, and I wonder, and this is kind of where, to bring it back full circle too, and Sean, you kind of made a great point. Actually, somebody literally just wrote this on something I shared the other day. They said, hey man, it's not 2001 anymore. Nobody wants to be a fireman. And so that's where I say, I think we took, recruiting was through the roof, not because anything we did, right? But because you had an event where people found a calling, right? And a purpose, and they found patriotism. And if, maybe they didn't qualify for the military, maybe they weren't ready to take that leap, but man, they wanted to be one of those firefighters that they saw on TV. And so we just sat back and let it happen. And that we rode that train, I would say, well into the 2010, 11, 12 era. And then we were so used to it that like we didn't do anything about it. And I think we're paying for that now. And I'm not going to sit here and knock all hazards, and I'm not going to say that community risk reduction is not important. But I think we pigeonholed ourselves into these things because by the time we realized that we had kind of separated from the community accidentally and we had stopped recruiting and we just kind of thought we had this image that made us larger in life, we scrambled to find things that would make us relevant again. And we just basically said, what does nobody else want to do? We'll do it. Whatever gets us back in the mind of the politicians, whatever gets us back in the mind of the voters. And now I think it's kind of hurt us because how do you get somebody to come do a job, as a volunteer for free, that is equivalent to 20 jobs, if you break it down by discipline? Or, I watch people bash the salaries we pay all the time, but people are advertising, hey, my department's hiring $13 an hour. People are like, I wouldn't do that shit for $13 an hour. And it's like, somebody's going to have to, but to me, I think that's the unintended consequence. I think it all ties back to the fact that we were playing on house money for so long that we forgot we were going to have to get some skin back in the game. And now we're paying for it. We really are. And this whole, it's the fire department, it's a great job, only goes so far.
Hey, I think, let's hit the first absolute critical point. And all of us today listening in or watching or talking, number one, this is the best damn job in the world. It has its moments where it will try you and you will wonder what the hell you're doing, right? Absolutely. But there's a couple pieces that we need to pick apart here. The first one is, I'm going to use the military as a perfect example. Congress decided to cut the budget for a DoD group, U.S. Air Force. Sorry for any of you Air Force guys. But what did they do when they cut that budget for all those specialties? They took away a recruiting tool, right? They listed out 20. Yeah, they listed out 25 specialty pays like load masters, jump masters, parachute riggers, PJs. They took away their specialty pay. That's a $400 to $900 deduction in their monthly pay for a group of men and women who are already paid pennies on the dollars, right? So that's the first part. The second part is, and this is to Mark's point, I saw a department over on the East Coast, I think it was in South Carolina,
Dorchester County.
Yeah, firefighter paramedic. Did you see how much it paid?
It was probably 60 or less.
45 to 55 was the starting, and that's a kick
It's
in
normal,
the pants.
man. That's normal
When
down
we're
here.
talking about inflation, where people have to survive. So on that side of the country, a lot of those guys and gals are working 2-3 departments, right? They'll work a full-time department, a part-time department, and then volunteer because they get a little compensation for it. Whereas over here on the West Coast, you got guys and gals that work one department, but they still struggle to make ends meet when the housing prices for all of us have skyrocketed. So what we need to do is we're not going to get more money. Let's be honest. We're just not going to get more money from politicians. We have politicians in our state who want to get rid of state taxing and just get away with it. Give it away. Be done with it. Well, how are you going to fund departments, right? We have got to find things that bring men and women into the organization for a love of the job, because it cannot be for money, because that's another thing that's happening. People left and right. Hey, I got overtime. Nope. Hey, I got overtime. Nope. Hey, you're going to be mandoed for overtime. I know people that have been mandoed 6 and 7 times this year for overtime already. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to go be a trucker. And I've watched guys do it from a neighboring department. Went and is a trucker now. He's tired of being mandoed. We've got to bring people in for the love of the job. We're not going to get rich off this.
I think mandates are a little bit of a different mental health issue, but I think that this younger generation is not in it for the love of the job. I think that they're in it for the ability to make money and do what makes them happy. And I think that that's a generational gap issue that we have. And then there's the political issues of the amount of money the government hands out to stay home now. Like my department has a problem with that. And I can make more money sitting home off unemployment than being on a fire truck and actually running calls. And that's from one of the highest paid departments in the country, where we are having issues retaining or hiring people because people are like, nah, I get more money from sitting home than I do from doing this job. So I'm going to do that. And that's a fact. So, but how do you change that culture? How do you change a generation to have love of job instead of, the way they are, I think is a really big challenge that will be very interesting to see how it's overcome.
So I'm gonna throw something out. It just sort of popped in my head. I could be completely wrong with this. I think this younger generation watched their parents working multiple jobs to get everything done.
Yeah.
And there's a disconnect between the family and the kids in that aspect. And they either fell back onto new technology, phones, computers, TVs, whatever. And I see there's more of an issue of guys potentially picking up and leaving the job. I've heard that, I don't like it here. I'm going to pick up, I'm going to go do something else. We had somebody that was talking about like picking up and just going and working for the Disney Corporation. I'm like, you're going to do what? And I'm like, so again, I think it has to do with what they saw their parents doing and busting their ass. For me, and I'll say it, my dad was a volunteer fireman from day one. I watched him. I love the culture, and that's what I wanted to be. But I also saw him in the private sector in the petroleum business, and we moved, and he got to change jobs, and at one time he was let go due to downsizing. So I knew I didn't want that. I wanted something more stable. And, when I got on, I started out in 2001, my starting pay for the first 6 months was $22,000. Our guys aren't really starting much higher than that right now. I don't believe. I think they're close to the 30s. There's a couple of jumps within the first 2 years. But again, living in the Northeast and Bill out in the West Coast, price, it's crazy how much, everything costs.
It's everywhere. It's down here too, because you're paid substantially less, right? Things cost less, but this whole idea that the cost of living is somehow like that much cheaper is bullshit, right? Like it is definitely cheaper to buy a house down here, but your salary is proportionately less to match it. So all I'm going to say on this, I do want to get to another part of this memorialization conversation, is that I think you're right, John. I think that the parents, this generation saw, it was the first generation that had a lot of single parent households. They saw their parents working basically their life away. And at the same time, their parents did it so they didn't have to work, right? Most of these kids didn't have jobs in high school. The demands they were all worried about getting into college and doing all these things. And it's coming full circle. And I still go back to the point that when you came on, when I came on, when pretty much everybody here, except for maybe Caleb, because he's probably the youngest one that's in the audience tonight, the firefighting was not an 18 discipline job. your initial certification was like 40 hours or less. It's over 150, or Chief Allure could speak to it better than anybody, however many hours you have now just to get your Fire One. And I go back to the death of the volunteer fire service fuels all this, because who has time to work a job or two and then go to their firehouse for 4 hours twice a week to maybe get certified after 2 freaking years so that they can, for free, go save their neighbors, man. Like, it's a different world. And that's might be a good topic for a future episode, is kind of getting into that. So the other side I want to hit, I think 9/11 is kind of our day to remember memorializing people. So I'm just curious what everybody's thoughts are about doing it in their own departments, because I've been through a handful of them. I think the eye opener for me was we sent a truck to Charleston after the Super Sofa warehouse fire, and man, that changed me. I remember being down there. I'd been on, I don't even know if I was on career yet. It was right in that time where I got hired, but I remember going down there. We sent a truck and a van full of people, and I just remember being on this road where there was fire engines too wide for as far as you could see from the top of the rig down both sides of the road. And that was before it took a left-hand turn and went. And I remember going down this route, the procession route, and having civilians on each side of the road, 5, 6, 7 deep, and just kind of realizing, what we meant to the community. But then I've also been around to where, we've had people who, either used to be on the fire department and they passed away, or their family members, and then they got very similar stuff in their services. So, my view is this, and I'm probably an insensitive dick, and it is what it is, but I think you got to have a separation in how we treat a line of duty death versus a past member or retired member, as far as the service goes, and what the department is willing to give and not give. Because to me, if a line of duty death is not a noticeable difference from how things are remembered and memorialized, and the services and processions are dealt with, I think you take away from, giving your life in service and duty and oath versus somebody who gave service for a lifetime and then, passed away later. So that's kind of where I stand on it. And I'm curious if I'm off my rocker or if everybody else is in the same wheelhouse.
Well, I will say this, and every fire service death is a loss. Let me just clarify that. But it used to be pretty definitive of what a line of duty death was considered, and we've now expanded that. And I think it's something like, if you're within 24 hours of your shift and you go home and something happens to you, how do you prove that wasn't job related, right? So those are things that I'm okay with. I think that has to happen. Some people will disagree because it didn't happen while they're actually physically working in the firehouse. But there's also the hometown heroes thing, which is all about mental health issues, people who committed suicide and things like that. So when we look at numbers and we start breaching all that stuff and pulling that for reasons why we do or we don't do things, I think it's important to know the facts and understand that. Because how do you tell a member, oh, we did this for one person because they qualified, but yours doesn't, right? How do we do that? How do we distinguish that? So I 100% agree. Without sounding disrespectful, there does need to be a separation, because they're two very different things, right? You retired after 30 years and you pass away. Well, that's such is life. Everybody passes away at some point. Should you have some fire department presence? Yes, absolutely. But should it be as big as maybe what they had for line of duty death? Probably not, because that goes back to resources being used and all those kind of things. And guess who's looking? The public, right? Well, why are we doing this extravagant thing? And their first thing they're going to say is, well, it's just a firefighter. You don't do this for everybody, right? So as much as we want to memorialize people and do all these things, at a certain point, at least in my view, is that we can overdo it, which then we inadvertently shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to gaining public trust.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that stemmed from, it has to do with qualifying the family for benefits, right? So it was a noble undertaking. You had to start putting all this on the umbrella of line of duty death, because the way the legislation is written, so that the families get the benefits, when their loved one is passed. I would like to see a duty related death in addition to a line of duty death, right? Line of duty death to me is you're in a house fire, right? Or you're on the interstate, you get run over, or you're at a med call and somebody runs up and shoots you, right? You are literally rendering service at the time of your death. If you have a medical emergency 24 hours after your shift, that is 100% duty related. I would be willing to bet, and your family should get the benefits. But I'm just speaking, I'm like you, Sean, I really hate to sound disrespectful. And when you hit things bluntly like this, people take it so wrong. And I'm not trying to minimize, like you said, one member passing versus another. But I really think as far as the memorial thing, like you said, the services, we're one of the few professions where like the public doesn't even blink an eye at it, right? They're just like, oh, like they'll pull over. But to your point, if that's an everyday occurrence, all of a sudden it's, oh, why are my tax dollars going down the road for somebody I didn't know? And oh, come to find out, they may or may not have got COVID, right, on duty. And now there's, a procession of 37 fire trucks going down my road. So that to me, I think is why, like you said, why you've got to kind of find a way to make sure the family gets the benefits that they should get for somebody who gave their life, serving others. But at the same time, there needs to be some kind of a separation for people who are literally lost in the application of their duties while it's happening.
Mark, you asked a question, I think it was just a few minutes ago before you and Sean got kind of talking about this and line of duty death stuff. And it was, what can we do? And just out of, curiosity kills the cat here, right? I listened to the 4 hours of tape from Manhattan Dispatch from 9/11. Has anybody ever done that?
Yeah, I've listened to it before.
Dude.
Give me chills.
Yeah. Still, I've done it 4 or 5 times. I did it again this morning. And, you hear all these men's voices. You hear all their voices on the radio. And you absolutely know that most of those voices on the radio will be the last time they ever talk on that radio. And, to listen to that civilian, hey, I'm a civilian. I'm in ladder 15. It says ladder 15. And I'm in civilian. I'm a civilian. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. You listen to that. Boy, that just kind of pulls at you. You listen to the FDNY members who are having heart attacks, who are having medical emergencies from going up those dang stairs, right? Marine One requesting assistance for firefighter down, having a heart attack, need oxygen on the Hudson River side. Listen into that. I tried to have some guys do that a few years ago, and they're like, why do we got to listen to this? I don't really want to listen to it. And it's like, you know what? You may not want to listen to it, but what did you glean from it? What did you glean from it? If anything, glean the emotional part of that. These are men that are driving literally to their death, and they don't even realize it yet. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's well put, Bill. And I think that brings it back to what we were talking about at the beginning, doing just what you talked about. It does make it personal, right? You now have this sense of attachment to it. I urge anybody to listen to those tapes, not just 9/11, but anytime that you have a Mayday or, one of those things that happen, firefighter fatality, listen to what they say in their last minutes, right? Listen to the radio traffic, listen to all those other things, because we tend to take a lot of things for granted, and when you're in that moment, you're listening to these things, if you're not getting goosebumps, you're not getting chills, and your heart doesn't sink to the floor, and you're not just like, oh my gosh, maybe this isn't the job for you. I don't know. Because those are the type of things that I listen to, and I come back and I'm like, man, this is why I do what I do. I do it for the people that I work beside, right? The things I do, the training and all this other stuff, the physical fitness, understanding the job, right? For them, so that they can go back to their families, because one of the most horrific things you'll ever hear on the radio is someone in their dying breath say, tell my family I love them. And then you feel absolutely helpless because you couldn't do something. I feel helpless listening to that, and I wasn't even part of that incident, you know. And those are kind of the things that I think we should be doing in the fire service to tell people, like, hey, like, we have a lot of fun here. I get it. It's a great job, you know. Like, I wouldn't want to do anything else, but there is a level of realism here, and this is it right here. So, you know, take a listen, you know, and tell me how this feels, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, that's a great segue too into, you know, the biggest part to me where we lack as a profession in the memorialization of those we lose is that I don't think we do shit about it. I really don't. And I'm just going to be very blunt and very angry about it. And I'm guilty like everybody else from time to time. But, you know, how are we improving when the NIOSH reports always list the same critical factors, right? Why are our communication not better? Why is incident command still a problem when, like John said, you know, NIMS expanded tenfold after 9/11, yet I guarantee if you read the latest line of duty death report, incident command was cited as a problem because it's a PowerPoint, it's a certification class, it's a passport that's Velcroed somewhere on the truck still in a command sheet, right? But is that really accountability incident? You know, the best thing we can do when this happens is do better for our people. And, you know, I'm not some messiah of the fire service, but I'm just going to give you a few examples of line of duty deaths that have impacted me and how I've tried to use to make people better, right? So like I mentioned Charleston earlier. Well, on the anniversary of the Super Sofa fire, I make our guys do the hydraulic problem from that fire. Because if you look at the NIOSH report and the hydraulics for it, it was impossible. They were never going to put that fire out. There's a size up component. There's a spotting component. There's all sorts of things that go with that fire. Nate Flynn in Howard County, again, size up, daylight basements that people don't think about. One of the things that you really got to get deep in the weeds to find out, but they talked about when they went to rescue him, they kept losing their cutters because they put them down to get through wire. And so that's why I have a piece of paracord that's hockey taped to my cutters that I can go over my arm. That's something that came out of that death. You know, Worcester cold storage fire, one of the first fires ever researched, you know, learn about building construction, learn about what real courage is of barring more people from going in there, learning about fire conditions. And, you know, you can go down the line of all these line of duty deaths. You know, Brad Clark, right on the interstate, shut the fucking road down. You know, like we kill more people through health problems, but we don't have mandatory, you know, fitness policies. We still let people use tobacco on duty. We kill people in traffic collisions, but we haven't changed our driving style. We don't block the road when we're out there. It's just all these things that go down and down and down. And it's such an inconvenience. And then, oh, well, somebody else died and we care for, you know, 15 minutes and then we're back to the same old stuff. So, you know, that's my soapbox for the day is just, you know, what is changing if the same causes are killing us? And, you know, obviously that doesn't really tie back to 9/11 because who could have predicted 2 aircraft being flown into the biggest buildings in the city, right? That's craziness. And obviously it's crazy till something similar happens again. But when you go down to the bread and butter, you know, 1, 2, 3 fatality line of duty deaths that we should be able to improve on, I just don't think we do it. I really don't.
And that goes back to my point. Hold on a
Yeah,
second.
go for it.
That goes back to my point of you have to learn what to change. And like I said, I was talking apparatus stuff because we had that in my department. So the small things you have to have handle your sphere of influence. You know, you can't think about you changing your whole department. You've got to worry about, like for me, I was as a lieutenant, I worried about my 5 guys or 4 guys that were assigned to me and my company. As a captain, I opened that up to my house. As a battalion, I opened it up to my shift. And again, you can't let the souls of these individuals that have passed haunt us because we need to learn from what happened to them and why and how it could have been prevented. I know Mike was about to jump and say something.
Excuse me, the 9/11, the 9/11 events, I'm not even going to get into the whole story because it's too long. I actually had the reverse experience that Bill had. I had just come home from 195 days of deployment overseas. And then 8 weeks later, 9/11 happened. So it was exactly the opposite. But I remember that feeling of being upset that all of the people, like I'm looking at John's license plate hanging out there. What does FTM stand for, John? Right, well,
Fuck the mutts.
right. Well, all the mutts went out there and we're all putting 9/11 this and 9/11 that and 9/11 the other thing. What were they changing? Nothing. And I promised myself that I would leave the fire service better than I found it at that time. I had come home from being overseas, serving my country. I found out on deployment that I was about to get promoted, and I had the opportunity to go back on active duty, and I didn't for a whole host of different reasons. But there were people that fought all of the changes that were trying to be made to make the fire service better because the fire service didn't want to change. And, you know, I'm in a position now where I'm watching people come in. I mean, we had, don't quote me the number, but for our June class, we have a daytime and a nighttime class. We had over 500 applicants, people trying to get into the fire academy. So people want to do this job. Now, I didn't come into the fire service for love of the job. I didn't know anything about the job. So for people that were legacy people that came in that had family, that had friends, whatever, that's fantastic. Did you have family
What?
in the fire service?
No.
No. So it was just, it was about service. It was about wanting to do for other people. And I think that if we can, I shouldn't even say we, if I can narrow it down to anything, it's about a lack of serving other people. It's not a love of the job. I don't even know what the job is because I don't do it anymore. It's been 5 years since I've done it. You know, I don't know what the inside of a firehouse looks like, and I can say that from a position of knowing that it's probably changed since I left it, but it's about service and how well are we serving people. And what I remember very vividly towards the end of my career was that I had changed my perspective on a lot of things. It started really in 2000, before 9/11. And then just a constant wave of change after that up until 2017. Literally, I have it written down on my phone. What is the role of the fire service now? It's the same role. It's to serve the community, but we resist the manner in which we serve it because we want to do what we want to do, the way that we want to do it, instead of going to the community and saying, how can we best serve you? If they want us to do something that we don't want to do, we'll sit there and say, well, we don't want to do that because we're trying to hold on to something that benefits us. And that's where I struggle most. And 9/11 for me is a difficult day. I remember 9/11 differently than most people. I was supposed to go into the city that day to visit a friend. And I got up and I turned the computer on and, you know, the big box monitor. And I looked and I saw, I have to remember, I was in Europe for 6 months. So I was just getting used to being back home. I wasn't being paid from the fire department. It was a challenging time. Getting used to being back stateside, getting used to being back in a routine. And I looked and I saw a picture of the Trade Center and I said, what is it, the anniversary of the bombing? Like, what is going on? And I walked out I turned television on and I saw it on TV, and I walked out in the front steps and you could see the Trade Center from my street. It changed everything for me, because I committed myself to saying, I want to make sure that I leave the fire service better than I found it. And I think that you know, for the people that are in here right now, we're preaching to the choir, and we understand that. Everybody's here is trying to leave it better than we found it. But really asking people, what, if you're coming into the fire service, I guess, and then I'll shut up. If you're coming into the fire service right now, you're coming in to serve. You're not coming in to get, you're coming in to give. And what is it about the fire service that makes you want to serve the community? And I see a lot of people right now, a lot that want, I see a bright future for the fire service. I do. The problem with the fire service is not the new people coming in. It's the old people at the top. That's what I see. There, I said it, you know. It's stifling the enthusiasm of the people that are coming into the business, because we all were new at one point, and you know, trying to force feed 9/11 or anything else on people, it's not gonna help. You know, is it important to remember? 100% it's important to remember. That monument I told you we have outside the classroom, they use it, or they were using it as a staging platform for the water cooler for the physical ability test. And I didn't take that very well. You know, remembering is fine, but who are we and who do we want to be as professionals and as a profession? I think it's important for us to define that, because it's going to change. I struggled. Michelle and I were talking about going to funerals. I went to funerals, and I still remember saying to myself, the words were, I have to remember that this did not happen to me. I didn't die. I didn't lose anybody that died. But the most impactful memory that I have of 9/11 was when I was asked by a friend to go visit a mother in New Jersey, in Little Falls. Her son died, and myself and Joe went to go visit her, and it was like, tear your friggin' heart out. That's what I remember. I don't remember burning buildings. I'm not listening to any, no disrespect, I'm not listening to any dispatch tapes. We'll go to the memorial just to see it. Again, from a first time from Michelle. But I don't want to see burning fire trucks. I don't want to hear dispatch tapes. I don't need to remember the significance of the day. How are you going to leave it better? How are you going to make it better? You know, for people that are on this call right now that are still serving, how are you going to make it better? That's what I myself.
Mike, you bring up an excellent point, and I don't feel disrespected by tapes, because here's a funny thing. When I got hurt, you know, just a month and a half ago, my deputy chief said, "Hey, we're going to pull the dispatch for when you declared a Mayday for when you got hurt." And my guys listened to it just for a minute, like, "Hey, you know, Chief Arsenal, Mayday, 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 broken leg. This is what I need for resources, blah, blah, blah." And my guys got done listening to it with my deputy chief, and they said, "Hey, you know what? Number one, very calm. He did it very calm." Well, that's just training. That's, you know, practicing those things. But they said the next thing, which is, again, making it better. They said, "You know what? We need to get better at rope rescue training. So if we're ever in this situation again," because Chief was the guy that knew how to do a lot of this stuff. We never really paid attention to it. But I guess we better pay attention to it now. That's making it better. Right. And if that's what it takes, then I'm all for it. And like on the back of our shirts, I don't have our department name on the back of our shirts. I have the Maltese cross with the Star of Life in the middle, because we're a fire rescue. But it says service before self on the back of our shirts. And I remind people of that all the time, that it's not about us. It's about the people we serve.
100%.
That's
It's about them.
yeah. And so this, I think, is a great way as we start to wrap up here. I think the theme that I would take from all this, John, you probably agree with me, is just, remembering is not necessarily the event, right? It's remembering the people who were lost in the event. And kind of what Chief Allure was saying earlier, I think a lot of our problem as a fire service right now is very much self-inflicted. I can't tell you how many people I've seen both in fire and EMS that have less than 2 years on the job that are already pissed off. And it's because they're learning it from the people they work with. They don't have those experiences. They've never gone on all those calls. They're not on long enough to be burnt out yet. They're just regurgitating what their mentors, quote unquote, are telling them. And that's why we are where we are. So I'm going to leave it with this tonight. If you want to remember things, remember to tell people about those who've been lost and how to get better about the job, right? Remember to give your knowledge to people with you instead of giving them ammo to be pissed off at a job that will give them everything they want in life if they would just let it. And that's how we correct the problem. And that's how we make the most out of the bad things that do happen on this job, right? We turn them into good things overall. But I don't know that anybody here or anybody that I really know that actually takes the fire service seriously would tell you there's a better job out there. If you want to go cut grass instead of ride on a fire engine, I feel bad for you. I really do. And so that's my soapbox for tonight. John, you got some closing thoughts?
No, I think you nailed it right on the head. Service for self is always important. And again, challenge everybody to leave the fire service better than we found it. Those are the best things that we can do. And remember those that came before us and learn from what occurred so we can make the fire service better.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thank everybody for joining us tonight. John, Sean, and myself are all going to be out at Firehouse Expo the last week in September. There's still time to sign up if you want to come. Even if you do nothing, if you're in driving range and you do nothing but come look at the exhibit floor, it's really good to get out and see some of the vendors, see the equipment that's out there, what people are doing with their apparatus, for better or for worse, depending on your perspective. Some of that stuff, I'm just like, man, whatever.
Clean cap.
Yeah,
That's
so
done. That's done.
Chief Allure, I wanted to give you a minute here to advertise your podcast that you're doing, because it's been keeping me entertained on my commute to work here for the past couple of weeks.
I'm glad. So we started, excuse me, we started Mentors on Fire podcast because, for myself, I know that you could talk about leadership all day long, and but really passing along lessons. When I got to a point where I felt like I wanted to really shape the next generation, and it happened shortly, after the events that we're talking about. There's a lot of ways to shape the future of the fire service, and Mentors on Fire podcast really is about talking to people about their stories. How did people get to where they are? What were the decisions? What were the trials, tribulations? What was the path? And it fascinates me. It absolutely fascinates me, because, there are people that look at me and think that I'm somebody, and it's like, if they knew the decisions and the steps and the path, they would probably look at it from a different perspective. So we have been pretty consistent, putting it out twice a month. Mentors on Fire podcast, you can find it on wherever you find podcasts. I appreciate you, Mark.
Yeah, and I would tell anybody who totes that line of the Chiefs don't understand to listen to that podcast and listen to what Chiefs actually talk about, because it's not what you think at all.
Good point.
So anyway, like I said, I thank everybody for joining us. We'll get hopefully more than a day notice for next month's episode. I was kind of slacking this week and had a couple busy shifts mixed in there and didn't get around to it. So thank you for spending some time with us. Again, 9/11, 21 years ago. Remember, figure out what that means to you, what it means to your crews. And like John said, service for self. Chief Allure said, get better, right? So everybody have a good night. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for hosting, Mark.
Absolutely.